The rain drummed against the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Gangnam Tower like impatient fingers, each droplet catching the kaleidoscope of neon that painted Seoul's skyline in electric blues and violent pinks. Jiwoo Park adjusted the weight of her specialized cleaning kit as the private elevator climbed past the 50th floor, her reflection ghost-like in the polished steel doors. At 26, she had perfected the art of invisibility, the kind that allowed her to slip in and out of Seoul's most exclusive spaces without leaving so much as a memory behind. The Kang Group Tower pierced the night sky like a glass dagger, all sharp angles and cold light. Through the elevator's transparent walls, Jiwoo watched the city shrink below her, a sprawling circuit board of wealth and secrets. Her phone buzzed with the final details of tonight's assignment. Penthouse level. Wine spill on Italian marble. Discretion required. Payment, 5 million won. Wine spill. Jiwoo almost smiled. In her 5 years as Seoul's most sought-after deep clean specialist, she'd learned that the wealthy spoke in euphemisms. Wine spills were often blood. Water damage usually meant tears, or worse. And when the city's elite called her at 11 p.m. on a Thursday, offering enough money to cover her rent for 3 months, it was never just wine. The elevator shuddered to a halt on the 68th floor with a whisper-soft chime. The doors slid open to reveal a private lobby that looked more like an art gallery than a hallway. A single door dominated the space, its surface a seamless sheet of black marble veined with gold. No doorbell, no nameplate, just a small biometric scanner that glowed like a cybernetic eye. Jiwoo's phone buzzed again, a text with a 6-digit code. She entered it, and the scanner pulsed green. The lock disengaged with the soft hiss of hydraulics, and the door swung inward on silent hinges. The penthouse beyond stole her breath. It was a monument to minimalist excess, 30-foot ceilings, walls of glass that offered a god's view of Seoul, and furniture that looked like it had been carved from single blocks of rare stone. Rain lashed the windows in sheets, turning the city lights into watercolor smears of amber and crimson. The air smelled of expensive cologne, leather, and something metallic that made her stomach clench. But it was the silence that unnerved her most. Not the comfortable quiet of an empty space, but the heavy, waiting silence of a held breath. Jiwoo set her cleaning kit on the black granite island that dominated the open kitchen and pulled out her phone to call the client. No answer. She tried again. Voicemail. Hello, this is Jiwoo Park with Seoul Elite Cleaning. I've arrived at the location, but I'm not seeing any wine. A sound cut through her words, low, wet, like water dripping from a broken faucet. Drip, drip, drip. The sound was coming from deeper in the penthouse, past the living area where a leather sofa the size of a small car faced the wall of windows. Jiwoo followed the sound, her soft-soled cleaning shoes silent on the polished marble floor, past a dining table that could seat 12, past abstract sculptures that probably cost more than most people's cars. The dripping grew louder. She rounded a corner into what had to be the master bedroom, and her world tilted sideways. A man lay sprawled on the white marble floor beside a bed that looked like an altar to hedonism. His black suit was torn and soaked with blood that had pooled beneath him in a perfect crimson lake. More blood spattered the walls in abstract patterns that told a story of violence and desperation. His face was turned away from her, dark hair matted with red. Jiwoo's hand flew to her mouth, stifling a scream. This wasn't a wine spill. This was a murder scene. And she was standing in the middle of it, her fingerprints on the door, her number in the call logs of whoever had lured her here. She fumbled for her phone, fingers shaking as she dialed emergency services. But before the call could connect, the man on the floor moved. Not the subtle shift of a dying breath or a final muscle spasm. He turned his head toward her with deliberate, controlled precision. Their eyes met. They were the darkest eyes she'd ever seen, black as the space between stars and just as cold. They belonged to a face that could have been carved from marble by a Renaissance master, all sharp cheekbones and aristocratic lines, beautiful in the way that predators were beautiful, dangerous in the way that made every instinct in her body scream, "Run." "You're early," he said, his voice a low rumble that seemed to vibrate through the marble floor. There was no pain in it, no weakness, just cold, absolute authority. Jiwoo stumbled backward, her phone clattering to the floor. You're alive." "Unfortunately for you, yes." He sat up with fluid grace, as if lying in a pool of his own blood was merely an inconvenience. The wounds that had looked fatal from a distance were real. A gash across his left temple, cuts on his hands, what looked like a bullet graze along his ribs, but none of them seemed to slow him down. "Who are you?" Jiwoo whispered. "Kang Dae-hyun." He said the name like it should mean something to her, like it should make her fall to her knees or burst into flames. "And you, I assume, are the cleaner." The cleaner. Not a cleaner. The cleaner. As if she were a person, not just a service. Dae-hyun rose to his feet with the predatory grace of a panther, blood still dripping from his fingertips onto the pristine marble. He was tall, well over 6 feet, and built like a man who had never known a moment of softness. The expensive suit clung to him despite the damage, revealing the kind of physique that came from violence, not gym memberships. "I didn't call for a cleaner," Jiwoo said, backing toward the bedroom door. "Someone else, someone must have." "Someone did." Dae-hyun took a step toward her, and she noticed he moved with barely a limp, despite what had to be multiple injuries. "My dear uncle, most likely. Or perhaps my loving brother. The Kang family has such a talent for cleaning up messes." Jiwoo's back hit the doorframe. "I should go. I should call the police. You need medical attention." "No?" The word cut through the air like a blade. "You shouldn't do any of those things." He was close enough now that she could see the flecks of gold in his dark eyes, could smell the metallic scent of blood mixed with something expensive and masculine. Close enough that when he reached past her to touch the wall panel beside the door, she could feel the heat radiating from his body. The panel lit up with biometric sensors, and Dae-hyun pressed his palm against it. A soft chime echoed through the penthouse, followed by the unmistakable sound of locks engaging. Heavy, final locks. "What did you just do?" Jiwoo's voice came out smaller than she intended. "Secured the penthouse." Dae-hyun's hand was still on the wall beside her head, effectively caging her against the doorframe. "Biometric locks, military grade. Only my DNA can open them now." The implications hit her like ice water. You can't lock me in here." "I just did." "This is kidnapping. This is survival." His voice dropped to a whisper that somehow carried more menace than a shout. "Mine. And if you're very smart and very lucky, yours as well." Jiwoo pressed herself harder against the doorframe, but there was nowhere to go. Dae-hyun loomed over her like a storm cloud, all dark energy and barely contained violence. But it was his stillness that terrified her most, the way he held himself with the confidence of a man who had never met a problem he couldn't solve, usually with blood. "Someone hired you to clean this room," he continued, his gaze never leaving her face. "Someone who believed I would be dead by the time you arrived. Someone who wanted any evidence of tonight's activities scrubbed away before the sun rose." "Evidence of what?" His smile was sharp enough to cut glass. "A coup, a family betrayal. The kind of mess that requires very special cleaning." Jiwoo's mind raced, trying to process what he was telling her. "You're saying someone in your family tried to kill you?" "Tried and failed." Dae-hyun straightened, finally giving her room to breathe. "But they won't make the same mistake twice. Which means I need to move quickly, and quietly, and invisibly." He turned away from her and walked to the wall of windows that offered a panoramic view of Seoul's glittering skyline. In the reflection of the glass, Jiwoo could see his profile, classical and cold as a statue. "You know what the most valuable thing in this city is?" he asked without turning around. Jiwoo didn't answer. She was too busy scanning the room for another exit, another option, anything that didn't involve being trapped 68 floors above the ground with a man who spoke about family coups like other people discussed the weather. Invisibility. Dae-hyun answered his own question. The ability to move through Seoul's elite circles without being seen, without being remembered, without leaving any trace that you were ever there. He turned back to her, and in the soft light from the city below, his blood-stained appearance looked almost artistic. Beautiful in a terrible way. "You, Jiwoo Park, age 26, no family, no connections, no political affiliations," he said, and her blood went cold at the realization that he knew far more about her than her name. "You are invisible, and right now, that makes you the most valuable person in Seoul. I want to leave." Her voice was steadier than she felt. "Unlock the door. Let me go. I won't tell anyone what I saw." "You can't unsee what you've already seen." Dae-hyun moved closer again, each step deliberate and predatory. "You know my face now. You know I survived tonight. That makes you either an asset or a liability. I choose neither. You don't get to choose." He stopped just inches from her, close enough that she could count his eyelashes, could see the small scar that cut through his left eyebrow. "But I do. And I choose to make you an offer." "What kind of offer?" Dae-hyun's smile was a masterpiece of controlled menace. "Help me reclaim what's mine, and I'll make sure you live to spend the fortune I'm going to pay you." "And if I refuse?" His smile widened, and Jiwoo understood with crystal clarity that she wasn't talking to just another privileged Chibol heir. This was something far more dangerous, something that wore expensive suits and spoke in soft, cultured tones while planning the kind of violence that left blood on marble floors. "Then you become a liability," Dae-hyun said softly. "And I don't keep liabilities alive." Outside, Seoul glittered like a circuit board of dreams and nightmares 68 floors below. Inside the penthouse, rain drummed against bulletproof glass, while a man who might be a monster offered her a choice that wasn't really a choice at all. Jiwoo looked into those dark, beautiful, terrible eyes and realized with sinking certainty that her old life, her quiet, invisible, safe life, had just died on this marble floor, along with whoever Dae-hyun's enemies had expected to find here. The cleaner had walked into a crime scene. She was never walking out. The silence stretched between them like a blade waiting to fall. Jiwoo's heart hammered against her ribs as she stared into Dae-hyun's obsidian eyes, searching for any hint of mercy, any crack in that perfect mask of controlled menace. She found nothing but cold calculation and the kind of patience that belonged to apex predators. "Tick, tock," he said softly, and the gentle words somehow carried more threat than any shout. "I'm bleeding, and my enemies think I'm dead. That gives us perhaps 3 hours before they realize their mistake and come to finish what they started." Jiwoo's gaze dropped to the spreading crimson stain on his white dress shirt. The bullet graze along his ribs was still seeping blood, and the gash on his temple had left dried streaks down the sharp line of his jaw. He was standing upright through sheer force of will, but even monsters had limits. "You need a hospital," she said quietly. "Hospitals keep records. Records can be traced. Traced leads to dead." Dae-hyun's voice carried the weight of absolute certainty. "The only medical attention I'm getting tonight comes from you. I'm not a doctor. I'm a cleaner. You're a woman who works with chemicals, understands sterilization, and has steady hands." He gestured toward her cleaning kit with casual authority. "You'll manage." Jiwoo looked at her equipment case, industrial-grade supplies designed to eliminate every trace of human presence. Bleach, peroxide, medical-grade alcohol, surgical gloves, precision tools for reaching impossible spaces. It was a complete arsenal for erasing evidence, not saving lives. I don't know how? Then you'll learn quickly. Dae-hyun moved toward the ensuite bathroom, each step measured despite the obvious pain. Because if I die, you become the only witness to tonight's events, and my dear family members will ensure that witnesses don't live to testify. The bathroom was a temple to excess. Black marble veined with gold, a walk-in shower that could accommodate 6 people, and mirrors that reflected infinite versions of the nightmare Ji-woo had stumbled into. Dae-hyun sat heavily on the edge of a marble bench, finally allowing a grimace of pain to crack his stoic facade. The shirt, he said, beginning to unbutton the blood-soaked fabric with movements that were just slightly too careful. Remove it. Ji-woo's hands trembled as she snapped on latex gloves and approached him. This close, she could see the true extent of the damage. Bruises darkened his ribs in abstract patterns of violence. The bullet graze was deeper than she'd initially thought, carving a raw channel through skin and muscle just below his left shoulder. Defensive wounds marked his hands and forearms, evidence of a fight he'd barely survived. But it was his back that made her gasp. Scars, dozens of them. Old wounds layered over older ones, creating a topographical map of violence that spoke to a lifetime of brutality. Some were surgical precise, others jagged and cruel. All of them spoke to survival against impossible odds. Surprised? Dae-hyun's voice carried dark amusement. The Kang family believes in teaching lessons early and often. My father was particularly creative. Ji-woo forced herself to focus on the immediate wounds, pushing away the implications of what those scars represented. She opened her cleaning case and extracted a bottle of medical-grade alcohol, cotton pads, and a small precision knife used for scraping dried stains. This will hurt, she warned. Everything hurts. Dae-hyun's voice was flat. Do it anyway. She started with the temple wound, cleaning away dried blood to reveal a gash that would need stitches. Her movements were careful, methodical, the same precision she used when removing impossible stains from priceless fabrics. Dae-hyun sat motionless as a statue, the only sign of discomfort, the slight tightening around his eyes. Tell me about your family, Ji-woo said, partly to distract him and partly because understanding her captor might be the key to surviving him. The Kang Group owns half of Seoul, he replied without moving. Construction, shipping, entertainment, technology. On paper, we're legitimate businessmen. In reality, we're an empire built on very careful violence. Ji-woo moved to the bullet graze, using cotton pads to clean the wound. The alcohol turned pink with blood and something darker. And tonight? Tonight, my uncle decided he was tired of waiting for his inheritance. Dae-hyun's voice carried the cold detachment of a man discussing stock prices. He arranged for me to attend a private meeting. I arrived to find 6 men with guns and very specific instructions. But you survived. I always survive. The certainty in his voice was absolute. It's what I do. It's all I do. Ji-woo worked in silence, cleaning and treating wounds with supplies meant for crime scenes, not medical emergencies. She used surgical thread meant for repairing torn, upholstery to close the deeper cuts. Dae-hyun endured it all with inhuman stillness, as if pain were just another business expense to be managed. You're very good at this, he observed as she worked on his ribs. I'm good at fixing things that are broken. The words slipped out before she could stop them. Are you? Something shifted in his voice, a note of genuine curiosity. And what broken things have you fixed, Ji-woo Park? She paused, suddenly aware that her entire life was laid bare to this man who seemed to know everything about everyone. Stains, damage, evidence of things people want to forget. And your own life? What damage have you been fixing there? The question hit too close to home. Jiwoo focused on applying pressure to slow the bleeding from his ribs, using the clinical task to avoid his penetrating gaze. I don't have a life that needs fixing. Everyone has damage. Daehyun's voice softened fractionally. The question is whether you're skilled enough to repair it or whether it breaks you first. Jiwoo finished treating the visible wounds and stepped back, stripping off the blood-stained gloves. I've done what I can. You need real medical attention. What I need is your complete attention. Daehyun stood slowly, testing his mobility. The makeshift bandages held, and color was returning to his pale features. Because now comes the interesting part. He moved to the bathroom's marble counter and retrieved a tablet from a hidden drawer. The screen lit up with what looked like financial reports, organizational charts, and surveillance photographs. But it was the central image that made Jiwoo's breath catch, a photograph of herself entering the building tonight. As of 20 minutes ago, Daehyun said conversationally, security cameras recorded you entering this building alone. As of now, there's no record of you leaving. The implication was clear. You're going to make me disappear. On the contrary, I'm going to make you visible in ways you've never imagined. He swiped to another screen showing what looked like corporate documents. Tomorrow morning, the Seoul financial community will discover that Kang Daehyun has acquired a very particular kind of asset. What kind of asset? Daehyun's smile was sharp as broken glass. A girlfriend. The word hit her like ice water. Absolutely not. Not just any girlfriend, he continued as if she hadn't spoken. A secret love affair, hidden for months while I consolidated power. A woman so precious to me that I've kept her existence completely private. Until now. Jiwoo backed toward the bathroom door, but Daehyun's presence seemed to fill the space, cutting off her escape routes. That's insane. No one would believe it. They'll believe it because it serves their interests to believe it. Daehyun set the tablet aside and moved closer, each step deliberate. My uncle thinks he's removed the only obstacle to his succession. My board of directors thinks they're dealing with a weakened, emotionally compromised leader. My rivals think they're looking at a man distracted by love. And what are they actually looking at? A man with the perfect cover for moving through Seoul undetected. His voice dropped to barely above a whisper. Because who pays attention to a man shopping for his beloved? Who questions a couple dining at exclusive restaurants? Who suspects anything sinister about a man buying his girlfriend expensive gifts? The plan was diabolical in its simplicity and terrifyingly effective. I won't do it, Jiwoo said, though her voice lacked conviction. You will. Daehyun reached into his jacket and withdrew a slim folder. Because the alternative is considerably less appealing. He opened the folder to reveal photographs that made her blood freeze, pictures of her apartment building, her elderly neighbor, Mrs. Kim, the night security guard who always smiled and asked about her day, the owner of the small restaurant where she ate lunch every Tuesday. Insurance, Daehyun explained with casual brutality. To ensure your complete cooperation, refuse my offer and I'll be forced to clean up every loose thread that connects to you. Every person who might remember your face, your name, your existence. You're a monster, Jiwoo whispered. Yes, he agreed without shame. But I'm a monster who keeps his agreements. Play the role I'm giving you, and these people live normal, happy lives. They'll never know how close they came to being collateral damage in a war they don't understand. He closed the folder and set it aside, but the images were burned into Jiwoo's memory. Mrs. Kim feeding stray cats on the fire escape. Young Officer Park, who always joked about her late hours. Innocent people whose only crime was existing in her orbit. What exactly would this role involve? She asked quietly. Public appearances, private moments, convincing the world that Kang Daehyun is a man in love. Daehyun moved to the mirror and began cleaning blood from his face with methodical precision. You'll live here, wear the clothes I provide, attend the events I require. In return, you'll have access to wealth beyond your imagination and protection beyond your dreams. And if I run, you won't run. His certainty was absolute, because there's nowhere to run to, and because deep down, you're curious about what it feels like to be powerful instead of invisible. The accusation hit home with devastating precision. Ji-woo had spent her entire adult life existing in the margins, cleaning up other people's messes while remaining utterly forgettable. The idea of stepping into the light, even artificial light, carried a terrible appeal. How long? She asked. Until I've reclaimed what's mine and eliminated the threats against it. Daehyun turned from the mirror, and she was struck again by his terrible beauty. Could be weeks, could be months. And then? Then you'll be free to resume your invisible life, considerably wealthier and infinitely wiser about the true nature of power in this city. Ji-woo looked around the marble bathroom, with its mirrors reflecting endless versions of herself, small, trapped, terrified, but also alive, still breathing when she could have been a corpse on the bedroom floor. I want guarantees, she said finally, written guarantees about the people in those photographs. Done. Daehyun's smile was sharp with triumph. Anything else? I want to know exactly what I'm walking into, what enemies, what dangers, what you're planning to do to reclaim your empire. Now you're thinking like someone who wants to survive. Approval colored his voice. Very well, but first, we need to address the immediate problem. Which is? Daehyun gestured toward the bedroom, where blood still pooled on marble floors. We have a crime scene to clean, and in 3 hours, when my dear uncle realizes his plan has failed, this penthouse becomes a war zone. He handed her fresh latex gloves from her own kit. Time to earn your new salary, Ji-woo Park, starting with making tonight disappear completely. As Ji-woo pulled on the gloves, she realized with crystalline clarity that she wasn't just cleaning up evidence of someone else's crimes anymore. She was about to become complicit in whatever Kang Dae-hyun had planned next. The cleaner had become an accessory. And somehow, terrifyingly, that felt like the first real choice she'd made in years. The crime scene had taken them 2 hours to erase completely. 2 hours of methodical work that transformed a marble battlefield back into pristine perfection. Ji-woo's hands still trembled slightly from the adrenaline of destruction and reconstruction. Bleaching blood, replacing carpet sections, repositioning furniture to hide bullet holes in the walls. Daehyun had worked beside her with the focused intensity of a surgeon, directing her movements with quiet commands that brooked no argument. Now, as dawn painted Seoul's skyline in shades of gold and amber, Ji-woo stood in the penthouse's walk-in closet, feeling like Alice tumbling down a very expensive rabbit hole. The space was larger than her entire apartment, walls lined with suits that probably cost more than most people's cars, shoes arranged with military precision, and accessories that gleamed like weapons in their designated alcoves. These won't do, Daehyun said, examining her blood-stained jeans and cleaning company polo shirt with the critical eye of an art appraiser evaluating a forgery. He had showered and changed into a fresh suit, charcoal gray with subtle pinstripes that somehow made his dark eyes look even more dangerous. The bandages were hidden beneath expensive fabric, and only the slight stiffness in his movements hinted at the violence he'd survived. "They're my work clothes," Ji-woo protested, though she knew it was pointless. "And now your work has changed." Daehyun moved to a section of the closet she hadn't noticed before. Women's clothing hanging in protective garment bags, designer labels she recognized from magazine spreads but had never imagined touching. Your new role requires a new wardrobe. The implications made her stomach clench. You keep women's clothes in your closet? I keep useful things in my closet. His tone was matter-of-fact, as if maintaining a selection of high-end women's fashion was as practical as owning multiple umbrellas. You're not the first woman who's needed to disappear into my world, though you're certainly the most reluctant. Jiwoo wanted to ask about the others, what had happened to them, where they were now, whether any had survived their usefulness. But Dae-hyun was already selecting items with the efficiency of someone accustomed to dressing women like dolls. This, he said, pulling out a dress that looked like it had been crafted from liquid shadow. Black silk that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, cut in lines that would transform any woman into a weapon of distraction. For tonight's debut. Tonight? The Harmony Foundation Gala. Dae-hyun laid the dress across a leather ottoman with the reverence usually reserved for religious artifacts. Seoul's elite gathering to congratulate themselves on their charitable generosity while conducting the real business in private alcoves and shadowed corridors. Jiwoo stared at the dress, understanding with sinking certainty that once she put it on, there would be no going back. The transformation from invisible cleaner to visible prize would be complete and irreversible. "I can't do this," she whispered. "You can. You will." Dae-hyun moved behind her, his presence a wall of heat and controlled menace. Because tonight, Director Kang will discover that his nephew is very much alive, very much in love, and very much planning to reclaim what was stolen from him. Director Kang, the uncle who had ordered Dae-hyun's execution. Jiwoo felt ice forming in her veins as she realized she wasn't just playing dress-up. She was walking into a den of killers who would smile while they planned her destruction. "He'll know I'm fake," she said. "One look at me, and he'll know I don't belong in your world." Dae-hyun's reflection appeared in the full-length mirror beside her, his dark eyes meeting hers in the glass. "You underestimate the power of context. Place a woman in expensive clothes beside a powerful man, and society writes its own story. They'll see what they expect to see. A secret love affair revealed, a weakness to exploit, a distraction they can use against me." His hands settled on her shoulders, the touch light, but somehow possessive. "And while they're focused on that fiction, they won't notice the real threat until it's far too late." 3 hours later, Jiwoo barely recognized herself. The transformation had taken place in stages, each one pulling her further from her old identity. First, a team of stylists had arrived at the penthouse with the silent efficiency of a surgical unit. Hair, makeup, nails, all performed with the precision of artists preparing a masterpiece for exhibition. They worked without conversation, as if touching her were just another technical task in Dae-hyun's vast empire of controlled details. The dress fit like it had been designed specifically for her body, which it probably had been. Dae-hyun seemed to be the kind of man who anticipated every contingency, including the exact measurements of women he might need to transform into assets. The silk whispered against her skin as she moved, the cut emphasizing curves she'd forgotten she possessed, while maintaining an elegance that spoke of old money and older secrets. But it was the jewelry that completed the metamorphosis. A necklace of black diamonds that caught the light like captured stars, matching earrings that framed her face in glittering shadows, and a bracelet that she suspected doubled as a tracking device. Each piece was worth more than she'd earned in her entire career, and they settled against her skin like beautiful shackles. "Perfect," Dae-hyun murmured, appearing behind her in the penthouse's main mirror. He had changed into formal attire, a tuxedo that transformed him from dangerous businessman into something far more lethal. In the black and white elegance of evening wear, he looked like a beautiful demon prepared for a very exclusive hell. "I look like someone else," Jiwoo whispered, staring at her reflection. "You look like someone who belongs to me." The possessiveness in his voice was undisguised, a statement of ownership that should have terrified her, but instead sent an unexpected shiver through her nervous system. And that's exactly what they need to see. The ride to the gala was a study in controlled tension. Dae-hyun's limousine, Bulletproof glass, soundproof interior, champagne that probably cost more than most people's rent, glided through Seoul's evening traffic like a predator moving through still water. He sat across from her, occasionally adjusting details of her appearance with the focused attention of a general inspecting troops before battle. "Remember," he said as they approached the hotel, "you're desperately in love with me. You've been my secret for months, hidden away like a precious treasure. Tonight is your debut into my world, and you're both thrilled and terrified by the exposure. That last part won't require any acting," Ji-woo muttered. "Good. Authenticity sells the performance." Dae-hyun's smile was sharp. "When Director Kang approaches, and he will approach, you say nothing. You smile, you look appropriately dazzled by the attention, and you let me handle the conversation. Your job is to be beautiful and devoted. Nothing more." The Grand Hyatt's ballroom was a monument to excess that made Dae-hyun's penthouse look modest by comparison. Crystal chandeliers the size of small cars cast rainbow patterns across marble floors polished to mirror brightness. The city's elite moved through the space like exotic birds displaying their plumage. Designers' gowns worth more than houses, jewelry that could fund small countries, and the kind of casual arrogance that came from never having to check a price tag. But it was the undercurrent of violence that surprised Ji-woo most. Beneath the civilized veneer of charity and culture, she could sense the predatory energy of apex predators marking territory. These weren't just wealthy socialites. They were the hidden rulers of Seoul's shadow empire, and every smile concealed a knife. "Dae-hyuna." The voice cut through the ballroom's elegant chaos like a blade through silk. Ji-woo felt Dae-hyun's entire body go rigid beside her, his hand tightening almost imperceptibly on her waist. She followed his gaze to see an older man approaching through the crowd, silver-haired, impeccably dressed, with the kind of face that could sell insurance or order executions with equal sincerity. Director Kang, the uncle who had tried to have his nephew killed just hours earlier. "Uncle," Dae-hyun replied, his voice carrying exactly the right note of respectful warmth. "What a pleasant surprise." Indeed. Director Kang's eyes swept over Ji-woo with the clinical assessment of a jeweler evaluating a stone. "I wasn't aware you were bringing a guest tonight." "Forgive the secrecy." Dae-hyun's arm around her waist pulled her closer, a gesture that looked protective but felt like a claim of ownership. "I've been rather protective of my personal life lately." "How thoughtful of you." The older man's smile never wavered, but Ji-woo caught the flash of calculation behind his eyes. "And you are?" This was the moment. The test that would determine whether she lived or died in the next few seconds. Ji-woo felt every eye in their vicinity focusing on her, waiting for her response. She said nothing, just smiled with exactly the right mixture of shyness and devotion, letting her eyes return to Dae-hyun as if he were the center of her entire universe. "Ah," Director Kang murmured, understanding passing across his features like clouds over the sun. "Love. How unexpected." "The heart wants what it wants," Dae-hyun replied, and the way he said it made the cliché sound like a threat. "Indeed, it does." Director Kang's attention shifted fully to his nephew, dismissing Ji-woo as irrelevant arm candy. It was exactly what Dae-hyun had predicted. Powerful men saw what they expected to see, especially when it confirmed their assumptions about weakness and distraction. "I trust your evening is going well?" the older man continued. "Exceptionally well. In fact, I was hoping to schedule a meeting. There are some family matters we should discuss." Director Kang's eyes sharpened. "Family matters?" "The kind that require privacy and careful consideration." Dae-hyun's smile was a masterpiece of controlled menace. "Perhaps tomorrow? At your office?" "Tomorrow?" The older man nodded slowly, already planning how to use this apparent weakness against his nephew. I look forward to our conversation. As Director Kang melted back into the crowd, Jiwoo felt her legs nearly give out from relief. She had passed the test without saying a word, simply by becoming the beautiful, devoted ornament that society expected powerful men to collect. Well done, Dae-hyun murmured against her ear, his breath warm against her skin. You're a natural? At being a decoration? At being mine? The possessiveness in his voice was undisguised now, and something in his tone made her pulse quicken in ways that had nothing to do with fear. And tomorrow, when my dear uncle attempts to eliminate what he perceives as my greatest weakness, he'll discover exactly how wrong he is about everything. Jiwoo looked around the ballroom filled with Seoul's hidden elite, understanding with crystal clarity that she was no longer just a witness to Dae-hyun's war. She was his weapon. And terrifyingly, she was beginning to like the way that felt. You've walked into the penthouse, and now the doors are locked. If you're enjoying this descent into the shadows of Seoul, make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Join our syndicate to unlock more stories of dark romance, high-stakes betrayal, and dangerous obsession. Leave a comment below. Do you think Jiwoo should run, or should she stay and fight? Let us know. The penthouse felt different when they returned from the gala. Smaller somehow, despite its vast expanse of glass and marble. Maybe it was the weight of what had transpired in that ballroom. Or maybe it was the way Dae-hyun moved through his domain with the restless energy of a caged predator. Jiwoo watched him from the living area as he stood before the wall of windows, his silhouette stark against Seoul's glittering skyline. He had been silent during the ride home, his attention focused on something beyond the bulletproof glass. But she could feel the tension radiating from him like heat from a forge, controlled, purposeful, and absolutely lethal. The performance at the gala had been flawless, but now, in the privacy of his sanctuary, something darker was emerging. You can take off the mask now, Jiwoo said quietly, settling onto the edge of the massive leather sofa. The black silk dress whispered against the soft hide, a sound that seemed unnaturally loud in the weighted silence. What mask? Dae-hyun didn't turn from the window, but she could see his reflection in the glass. Beautiful, terrible, and utterly isolated. The one you wore for your uncle, the one that made you look like a man in love instead of a man planning murder. That got his attention. He turned slowly, his dark eyes finding hers across the expanse of pristine marble. You think I was acting? The question caught her off guard. There had been moments tonight, his hand at her waist, the way he'd looked at her when adjusting her necklace, the possessive edge in his voice when he spoke about her. That had felt disturbingly real. But that was impossible. Kang Dae-hyun was a monster who spoke of killing with the casual ease of discussing stock prices. He didn't feel anything real for anyone, least of all, a woman he'd trapped into playing his games. Weren't you? She asked. Instead of answering, he moved to the bar cart and poured himself 3 fingers of something amber and expensive. The liquid caught the city lights like liquid gold, and he drained half the glass in a single swallow. Tell me about your family, he said, deflecting her question with the skill of someone accustomed to controlling conversations. Parents? Siblings? Anyone who taught you that survival requires pretending to be something you're not? My parents died when I was 16. The words came out more easily than she'd expected. Maybe because the darkness beyond the windows made confession feel safer somehow. Car accident on the Gangnam Bridge. After that, it was just me and whatever jobs I could find that didn't require references or questions about why a teenage girl was living alone. No relatives? No family friends willing to take in an orphan? Jiwoo's laugh was bitter. You don't understand how invisible people like me are to people like them. We clean their houses, deliver their food, remove their stains. But we don't exist as actual humans worthy of consideration. Dae-hyun studied her with those penetrating dark eyes, and she had the uncomfortable feeling he was cataloging every detail of her story for future use. And you've been invisible ever since. It's safer that way. Safer. He repeated the word as if it tasted strange on his tongue. Yes, I suppose it would be. Though I wonder what you might have accomplished if you'd chosen to be seen instead. The comment stung because it hit too close to truths she'd spent years avoiding. How many opportunities had she walked away from because they required stepping into the light? How many chances at something better had she sacrificed on the altar of safety? What about your family? She asked, turning the scrutiny back on him. Obviously complicated, since your uncle tried to have you killed. Complicated. Dae-hyun's smile was sharp enough to draw blood. That's one word for it. He moved away from the window, settling into the chair opposite her with fluid grace. This close, she could see the exhaustion he'd been hiding, shadows under his eyes, tension in the set of his shoulders, the way he held himself just slightly too carefully. The violence of the previous night was catching up with him, but he'd rather die than show weakness. The Kang family, he said, swirling the amber liquid in his glass, has been building an empire for 3 generations. My grandfather started with construction, legitimate work rebuilding Seoul after the war. My father expanded into shipping, then entertainment, then technology. Each generation more successful, more powerful, more legitimate on the surface. And underneath? Underneath, we remained exactly what we'd always been. Wolves dressed in expensive suits. Dae-hyun's voice carried no shame, no regret, just cold acceptance of fundamental truth. Violence is our first language. Everything else is translation. Rain had started falling again, drumming against the windows in irregular patterns that caught the neon. Reflections from the street below? The sound was hypnotic, intimate, in the way that storms always were when you were safe and warm inside watching them. Director Kang, your uncle? He was supposed to inherit? Ji-woo asked. He was supposed to be content with his position as my father's right hand. Dae-hyun finished his drink and set the glass aside with precise care. But contentment was never Uncle's strongest virtue. He's been planning this coup for years, waiting for the perfect moment to eliminate the direct line and claim what he believed was his by right. What changed? What made tonight the perfect moment? Something shifted in Dae-hyun's expression, a flicker of something that might have been pain if she hadn't known better. My father died 6 months ago. Heart attack, officially, though I suspect Uncle's patience simply ran out. The admission hung in the air between them, like smoke from a snuffed candle. Ji-woo found herself studying his face, looking for signs of grief beneath the marble perfection. She found nothing but carefully controlled emptiness. You don't seem particularly broken up about it, she observed. My father was a monster who taught me to be a monster through the liberal application of violence and cruelty. Dae-hyun's voice remained perfectly level. I mourn the loss of his protection, not his affection. Protection? As long as he was alive, I was untouchable. His heir, his legacy, his investment in the family's future. Dae-hyun stood and moved back to the window, but this time his posture was different, less predatory, more isolated. With his death, I became just another obstacle in Uncle's path to absolute power. Ji-woo watched his reflection in the glass and saw something she hadn't expected. Loneliness. Not the temporary solitude of a man between companions, but the bone-deep isolation of someone who had never known genuine connection, who had been raised to see relationships as transactions and affection as weakness. Your brother, she said, remembering his earlier comment about family cleaning up messes. Was he part of tonight's attempt? Younger brother, Kang Min-ho. The name came out flat, emotionless. Uncle's insurance policy. if killing me directly proved too complicated, having a backup heir would simplify the transition. And you're certain he was involved? I'm certain he knew. Dae-hyun's reflection smiled, but there was no humor in it. Min-ho has always been better at politics than violence. He probably convinced Uncle that a clean succession would be preferable to a messy war. The casual way he discussed his brother's betrayal was somehow more chilling than his threats about killing her if she proved unreliable. This was a man who had learned that trust was a luxury he couldn't afford, that even blood ties were just another weapon to be turned against him. How old were you when you learned that your family couldn't be trusted? Ji-woo asked quietly. Dae-hyun was silent for so long that she thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of old wounds that had never properly healed. 8. My father decided I needed to understand the true nature of power. He arranged for my closest friend, a boy from my school whose family worked for ours, to betray a secret I'd told him in confidence. Something innocent, childish, but the betrayal was real, and the lesson was clear. What lesson? That trust is a weapon other people use against you. Dae-hyun turned from the window, and in the soft lighting of the penthouse, his face looked younger somehow, vulnerable in a way that made her chest tight. And that if you want to survive in this world, you learn to be the only person you can rely on. Ji-woo thought about her own childhood. Parents who had loved her unconditionally, right up until they died. Friends she'd lost when she disappeared into the invisible margins of society, the careful isolation she'd built around herself like armor. Different circumstances, but maybe not such different conclusions. Is that why you've never married? She asked. Never had a real relationship? I've had relationships. His smile was sharp, self-deprecating. Transactions dressed up as romance. Women who wanted access to my wealth or power or status. I gave them what they wanted. They gave me what I needed, and everyone understood the terms. What did you need? Distraction, physical release, the appearance of normalcy. He moved closer, and she caught the scent of his cologne mixed with something darker, more masculine. But never trust, never genuine connection, never the luxury of lowering my guard around another human being. The admission hung between them like a bridge neither had expected to cross. Ji-woo found herself studying his face, looking past the perfect features to the man underneath. What would it be like, she wondered, to live every moment of your life, knowing that everyone around you was either an enemy or a potential weapon to be used against you? That sounds exhausting, she said. It's survival. But something in his voice suggested he was as tired of that survival as she was of her own invisible existence. Thunder rolled across Seoul's skyline, and the rain intensified against the windows. In the reflection of the glass, Ji-woo could see herself, transformed into someone she barely recognized, wearing clothes worth more than her annual salary, sitting in a penthouse that existed in a different universe from her small, careful life. You could have chosen anyone, she said quietly. For this charade, I mean. Any woman in Seoul would have agreed to play your girlfriend for the kind of money you're offering. Could I? Dae-hyun moved to the sofa, settling beside her with careful grace. Close enough that she could see the gold flecks in his dark eyes, could count the subtle scars that marked his hands. Any woman I approached would have had connections, family, friends who might ask inconvenient questions. They would have wanted something beyond money, status, marriage, a permanent place in my world. And I don't. You don't have anyone to ask questions. His honesty was brutal in its directness. No family to worry about your sudden disappearance. No friends who would miss you if you vanished entirely. You're completely alone in the world, which makes you perfect for my purposes. The words should have hurt. They were designed to hurt, to remind her of her own isolation and vulnerability. But instead, Ji-woo found herself studying his face and seeing something else entirely. That's not the only reason, she said. No? You chose me because I'm the first person you've met who's as alone as you are. The realization came to her with startling clarity. You don't trust me because I'm trustworthy. You trust me because I'm the only person in your world who has nothing to gain from betraying you. Dae-hyun went very still, and for a moment she thought she'd pushed too far, that he would retreat behind his mask of cold control and remind her exactly how precarious her position was. Instead, he reached out with careful precision and touched her face, fingertips tracing the line of her cheek with unexpected gentleness. You're more perceptive than I gave you credit for, he murmured. The touch sent electricity through her nervous system, and she realized with dawning horror that she was attracted to him, not just to his obvious physical beauty, but to the broken, dangerous man underneath, the one who had been raised by monsters and turned into something equally terrible, but who still carried enough humanity to recognize a kindred spirit in another lost soul. This is dangerous, she whispered, though she made no move to pull away from his touch. Everything about this is dangerous. His thumb brushed across her lower lip, and she felt her breath catch. But danger has always been the only thing that felt real to me. The city lights painted patterns across his face as he leaned closer, and Ji-woo realized that the most terrifying thing about Kang Dae-hyun wasn't his capacity for violence or his absolute ruthlessness. It was the way he made her feel like she was finally completely visible, like she was the only person in his dark, glittering world who mattered enough to protect. Like she was home. The kiss never happened. Just as Dae-hyun's lips brushed against hers, a whisper of contact that sent fire through her veins, his phone shattered the intimacy with its sharp, insistent buzz. He pulled back instantly, the moment of vulnerability vanishing behind a mask of cold professionalism as he glanced at the screen. Trouble? Ji-woo asked, though she could read the answer in the sudden tension of his shoulders. Always. Dae-hyun's voice had returned to its usual controlled tone, but she caught the flicker of regret in his dark eyes before he turned away to take the call. Yes? Ji-woo couldn't hear the other side of the conversation, but she watched Dae-hyun's reflection in the window as his expression shifted from alertness to something far more dangerous. His free hand clenched into a fist, and when he spoke again, his voice carried the kind of quiet menace that made her skin prickle. How many? A pause. When? Another pause, longer this time. No, absolutely not. We proceed as planned. He ended the call and stood motionless for several heartbeats, staring out at Seoul's glittering expanse. When he finally turned back to her, Ji-woo was struck by the transformation. Gone was the man who had touched her face with unexpected gentleness. In his place stood the apex predator she'd first encountered bleeding on his marble floor. Pack a bag, he said simply. What's happening? My uncle has decided that subtle approaches are insufficient. Dae-hyun moved to his closet with swift economical movements. 3 hours ago, a cleaning crew was dispatched to my secondary residence in Itaewon. They found it empty, naturally, but their presence confirms that the family has moved from assassination to open war. Ji-woo felt ice forming in her stomach. They know you're alive. They know I survived last night's attempt. He emerged from the closet, carrying a leather overnight bag and what looked like a shoulder holster. What they don't know is how much I learned about their operation before I disappeared. The gun that he strapped beneath his jacket was matte black, purposeful in its ugly functionality. Watching him check the weapon with professional efficiency, Ji-woo was reminded that Kang Dae-hyun wasn't just a businessman playing at being dangerous. He was a predator who had been raised from childhood to kill when killing was required. Where are we going? She asked. The Kang Group annual board meeting, scheduled for 10 a.m. at our headquarters in Gangnam. Dae-hyun's smile was sharp enough to cut glass. Uncle will be expecting me to hide, to lick my wounds and plan my revenge from the shadows. Instead, I'm going to walk into that boardroom and remind everyone exactly what happens to people who mistake mercy for weakness. The implications crashed over her like cold water. You're going to kill him in front of the board of directors? I'm going to reclaim what belongs to me using whatever methods prove necessary. The distinction seemed important to him, though Jiwoo couldn't see much practical difference. Your role is to be visible, devoted, and completely untouchable. The perfect distraction while I handle the business of power. An hour later, they were moving through Seoul's morning traffic in an armored sedan that looked innocuous, but felt like riding inside a tank. Dae-hyun sat beside her, his attention apparently focused on financial reports displayed on his tablet. But she could feel the coiled tension radiating from him like heat from a forge. He was dressed for war in a suit that probably cost more than most cars, charcoal gray with subtle pinstripes that somehow made him look even more dangerous than the blood-stained clothes she'd first seen him in. Jiwoo had been transformed again, this time into the picture of professional elegance. A navy blue dress that spoke of boardrooms and power lunches, pearls that caught the morning light, hair pulled back in a style that was sophisticated without being severe. She looked like the kind of woman who belonged beside a man like Dae-hyun, educated, refined, completely comfortable with wealth and influence. The performance was becoming easier each time, she realized with disturbing clarity, maybe because the line between acting and reality was blurring in ways she didn't want to examine too closely. The building will be secured, Dae-hyun said without looking up from his tablet. Uncle's people in positions of authority, loyalists armed and ready, will be walking into what amounts to a fortified position. Then why are we walking into it at all? Because sometimes the best defense is an offense so audacious that your enemies can't comprehend it until it's too late. He finally looked at her, and the predatory intelligence in his dark eyes made her pulse quicken. And because I want Director Kang to see exactly what he tried to destroy before I return the favor. The Kang Group headquarters rose from Gangnam's concrete jungle like a monument to corporate ambition, 60 floors of glass and steel that reflected Seoul's skyline in its mirrored surface. As their sedan pulled into the underground garage, Jiwoo noticed the unusual number of security guards stationed at every entrance, the way their eyes tracked the vehicle's movement with professional alertness. Your uncle's people? She asked. Some of them? Dae-hyun's hand found hers, his fingers intertwining with hers in a gesture that looked romantic, but felt like claiming territory. Stay close to me. Smile when spoken to. And if anything goes wrong, anything at all, get behind me and stay there. The elevator ride to the 60th floor felt like ascending into the stratosphere. Through the transparent walls, Seoul shrank below them until the city looked like a circuit board of ambition and dreams. But it was their reflection in the polished steel doors that held Jiwoo's attention. They looked like a power couple from a magazine spread, beautiful and untouchable, and absolutely lethal. The boardroom was a temple to corporate power, mahogany table that could seat 20 floor-to-ceiling windows offering a god's view of Seoul, and enough understated luxury to fund small countries. But it was the people already seated around the table that made Jiwoo's breath catch. These weren't just business executives, they were predators in expensive suits, each one radiating the kind of casual menace that came from never having to face consequences for their actions. Director Kang sat at the head of the table like a king holding court, his silver hair perfectly styled, his smile warm and welcoming, and absolutely deadly. When Dae-hyun entered the room with Jiwoo on his arm, the older man's expression didn't change by so much as a flicker. "Nephew," he said warmly, rising from his chair with theatrical surprise. "What a pleasant surprise. I wasn't certain you'd recovered from your illness." "Uncle?" Dae-hyun's voice carried exactly the right note of respectful affection. "I wouldn't miss such an important meeting, and I thought it was time to introduce someone special." The attention of every person in the room focused on Jiwoo like the beam of a spotlight. She felt their calculating gazes, cataloging every detail of her appearance, looking for weaknesses, vulnerabilities, angles of attack. But she kept her expression serene, devoted, completely focused on the man beside her. "How lovely," Director Kang murmured, though his eyes remained cold as winter stars. "Please, sit. We have much to discuss." The meeting proceeded with the superficial civility that barely concealed the underlying savagery. Financial reports, operational updates, strategic planning, all discussed in the calm professional tones of people who had learned to speak of violence in euphemisms. But Jiwoo could feel the tension building like pressure in a kettle, everyone waiting for someone to make the first overt move. It was during the discussion of operational restructuring, which she suspected meant eliminating inconvenient executives, that everything went sideways. The lights went out. Emergency lighting kicked in seconds later, bathing the boardroom in hellish red that turned every face into a mask of shadows and malevolent intent. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, Jiwoo could see that the blackout extended for blocks in every direction, too widespread to be accidental, too precisely timed to be coincidental. "Gentlemen," Director Kang said calmly, as if sitting in the dark discussing murder was perfectly normal, "I believe we have a technical difficulty." That's when the shooting started. The sound of automatic weapons echoed up from the floors below, punctuated by shouts and the crash of breaking glass. Not random violence, coordinated, professional, designed to clear the building floor by floor. "Rival family?" one of the board members asked with the casual interest of someone discussing stock prices. "Unlikely," Director Kang replied, but Jiwoo caught the flicker of uncertainty in his voice. "Perhaps government forces? We've been careless with our recent acquisitions." Dae-hyun said nothing. He simply reached beneath his jacket and drew his weapon with the fluid precision of a man who had never needed to think about such movements. In the red emergency lighting, the gun looked like an extension of his hand, natural, deadly, absolutely appropriate. "Or perhaps," he said conversationally, "it's someone you thought was dead coming to reclaim what belongs to him." The boardroom erupted into chaos. Director Kang's hand darted toward his own weapon, but Dae-hyun was faster. The sound of his gun firing was impossibly loud in the enclosed space, and the older man's shoulder exploded in a spray of blood that painted the mahogany table crimson. "Nobody moves," Dae-hyun commanded, and the absolute authority in his voice froze every person in the room. "Nobody breathes without my permission." Jiwoo found herself pressed against his back as he'd instructed, feeling the controlled violence radiating from him like heat. But it was what happened next that showed her the true depth of Dae-hyun's planning. The boardroom doors burst open, and instead of Director Kang's security forces, armed men in tactical gear flooded in. Professionals who moved with military precision and whose weapons were pointed at everyone except Dae-hyun and Jiwoo. "Gentlemen," Dae-hyun said to the terrified board members, "I'd like you to meet the real security team for this building, the one that's been loyal to the Kang family's legitimate leadership all along." Director Kang clutched his bleeding shoulder, his face twisted with rage and disbelief. "You little bastard, you planned all of this." "I planned everything." Dae-hyun's voice carried the cold satisfaction of absolute victory. "The blackout, the distraction on the lower floors, the replacement of your security personnel with mine. Did you really think I'd walk into your trap without preparing a few surprises of my own?" One of the tactical team members approached and whispered something in Dae-hyun's ear. Whatever he said made Dae-hyun's smile turn predatory. "Excellent news, Uncle. It seems your co-conspirators have been apprehended attempting to flee the building. My dear brother Min-ho sends his regards. Apparently, he's decided that backing the winning horse is more profitable than family loyalty." The older man's face went gray with shock and pain. "You're making a mistake, boy. Kill me, and you'll have every family in Seoul hunting you." "Kill you?" Dae-hyun moved closer, his gun trained on his uncle's head with steady precision. "Uncle, you misunderstand completely. I'm not going to kill you." Director Kang's eyes flickered with hope. "I'm going to make you disappear so completely that people will forget you ever existed." Dae-hyun's smile was beautiful and terrible, just like you tried to do to me. He gestured to his security team, and they moved forward with professional efficiency. Within minutes, Director Kang and his surviving co-conspirators were gone, vanished as if they had never existed at all. The boardroom fell silent, except for the distant sounds of sirens and the gentle hum of climate control. In the red emergency lighting, Dae-hyun looked like a beautiful demon who had just reclaimed his throne through blood and cunning. "Gentlemen," he said to the remaining board members, "I believe we have a company to run." As the lights came back on and the meeting resumed as if nothing had happened, Ji-woo realized with crystal clarity that she had just witnessed the birth of a new kind of monster. Not the broken, isolated man she'd glimpsed in his penthouse, but something far more dangerous. A predator who had learned that the only way to protect what mattered was to become more ruthless than everyone else. And the way he looked at her as order was restored, the possessive intensity in his dark eyes, told her exactly what he considered worth protecting. She belonged to him now, completely and irrevocably. And terrifyingly, she was beginning to understand that she didn't want it any other way. Three weeks later, Ji-woo stood in the penthouse's walk-in closet, surrounded by a wardrobe that had become as familiar as her own skin. Designer dresses hung in perfect rows, shoes arranged with military precision, jewelry that caught the morning light like captured stars. Everything she needed to be Kang Dae-hyun's perfect companion, his beautiful weapon, his most treasured possession. The transformation was complete now. The invisible cleaner who had stumbled into a crime scene no longer existed. In her place stood a woman who moved through Seoul's elite circles with practiced grace, who could silence a room with a smile, who wore power like expensive perfume. But it was the woman in the mirror who surprised her most, the one whose eyes held secrets darker than designer mascara, and whose mouth curved with knowledge that would have terrified her former self. "You're ready," Dae-hyun said from the closet entrance, though he wasn't looking at her clothes or her carefully applied makeup. His gaze was focused on her face, reading the subtle changes that 3 weeks of living in his world had wrought. He looked different too. The careful tension that had defined him during their first encounters had been replaced by something far more dangerous, the relaxed confidence of a predator who had eliminated all threats to his territory. "For the press conference?" Ji-woo asked, though she knew that wasn't what he meant. "For everything that comes after?" He moved closer, his presence filling the space between them with heat and barely contained possession. "The official announcement of our engagement, the merger with the Hwang Group, the consolidation of power that will make the Kang family untouchable for the next generation." The engagement ring on her finger caught the light, a black diamond surrounded by smaller stones that looked like stars orbiting a dark planet. Beautiful, valuable, and impossible to remove once placed. Like everything else in her new life, the press conference was held in the Kang Group's main conference room, transformed into a stage for Seoul's media elite. Cameras flashed like strobing lightning as Dae-hyun introduced his fiancée to the world, his arm around her waist, possessive and protective. The story they told was perfect in its simplicity. A secret romance finally revealed, a love affair that had been hidden for months, while he consolidated his position as the family's new patriarch. The reporters ate it up with the hunger of sharks scenting blood. Here was the kind of fairy tale that sold magazines and dominated social media feeds. The mysterious heiress who had captured Seoul's most eligible bachelor, the reclusive businessman finally brought low by love. None of them suspected that the woman smiling beside him had been a crime scene cleaner just 3 weeks earlier. "Miss Park," one journalist called out, "how did you and Director Kang meet?" Jiwoo's smile was perfect, practiced, devastatingly beautiful. "It was quite unexpected," she said, her voice carrying just the right note of shy romance. "He needed someone to clean up a situation. I happened to be available." The laughter that rippled through the room was warm, indulgent. They heard a charming euphemism for some minor social mishap. They had no idea she was describing the moment she'd found him bleeding on his marble floor. After the conference, they returned to the penthouse in silence that felt different from their early days together. Not the tense quiet of predator and prey, but the comfortable understanding of two people who had seen each other's true faces and chosen to stay anyway. "It's finished," Dae-hyun said, as Seoul's skyline glittered beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows. "The board is unified, the rival factions eliminated, the family business secured for the foreseeable future." "And your uncle?" "Director Kang has retired to a very private facility where he can contemplate the error of his ways." Dae-hyun's smile held no warmth. "He'll live, but he'll never be a threat to anyone again. Sometimes a living reminder is more effective than a corpse." Jiwoo nodded, understanding the brutal mathematics of his world better now. Death was final, but broken enemies served as ongoing warnings to anyone else who might consider challenging his authority. "What about your brother?" "Minho has proven surprisingly adaptable. He's accepted a position overseeing our European operations. Far enough away to be harmless, close enough for me to monitor his activities." Dae-hyun moved to the bar cart and poured himself a drink, but didn't offer her one. That small detail felt significant, though she couldn't say why. "So everyone who betrayed you has been dealt with." "Everyone." He turned to face her, and something in his expression made her pulse quicken. "Which brings us to you." The words hung in the air like smoke from a snuffed candle. Jiwoo felt her carefully constructed, composure wavering as she met his dark gaze and saw something that looked almost like regret. "I made you a promise," Dae-hyun continued, setting his glass aside untouched. "When this was over, you'd be free to resume your old life, considerably wealthier and infinitely wiser, but free nonetheless." He reached into his jacket and withdrew something that made her breath catch, a small device that she recognized as the master key to the penthouse's biometric security system, the thing that had kept her trapped in his world for 3 weeks. "Your freedom," he said simply, placing it on the marble counter between them. "The locks are disengaged. The financial transfers have been completed. Your old apartment has been maintained exactly as you left it. You can walk out that door and disappear back into the invisible margins of Seoul's society. I'll ensure you're never bothered by anyone connected to the Kang family." Jiwoo stared at the device, understanding that this was the moment she'd been anticipating since that first night, when he'd locked her in his cage of glass and steel. Her chance to escape, to reclaim her quiet, safe, utterly predictable existence. "What about the engagement?" she asked quietly. "The public story?" "Miss Park will suffer a tragic accident," Dae-hyun replied, with the casual ease of someone discussing dinner plans. "A car crash, perhaps, or a fall from a building. The details will be appropriately vague. The body never recovered. Kang Dae-hyun will mourn privately and eventually remarry someone more suitable to his station." The clinical way he discussed erasing her from existence should have terrified her. Instead, Jiwoo found herself studying his face, looking for cracks in the perfect mask he wore. She found them in the tension around his eyes, the way he held himself just slightly too still, the careful distance he maintained between them. "You want me to go?" she said. "I want you to choose." His voice carried an edge she'd never heard before, something that might have been vulnerability if she hadn't known better. For the first time since you walked into my world, I'm giving you a genuine choice with no coercion, no threats, no consequences beyond whatever you decide you can live with. Jiwoo picked up the biometric key, feeling its weight in her palm. So small, so insignificant looking, and yet it represented the difference between captivity and freedom, between safety and danger, between invisibility and the kind of visibility that came with being claimed by a monster. "And if I choose to stay?" she asked. "Then you stay forever." The possessiveness in his voice was undisguised now, raw and absolute. Not as a temporary asset or a useful tool, but as mine, completely, irrevocably, with full understanding of what that means in my world. Which is? Daehyun moved closer, and she caught the scent of his cologne mixed with something darker, more masculine. "It means you'll never be invisible. Again. Never safe. Never ordinary. It means binding yourself to a man who solves problems with violence and considers love a weakness to be exploited. It means accepting that everyone who knows your name will either fear you or want to destroy you." He was close enough now that she could count his eyelashes, could see the gold flecks in his dark eyes. It means belonging to someone who will kill anyone who threatens you, who will remake the world to ensure your safety, who will never let you go once you're truly his. "You're trying to scare me away." "I'm trying to be honest." His hand lifted toward her face, then stopped inches short of contact. "Because once you make this choice, there's no going back. No second chances. No escape clauses. No mercy if you decide you've made a mistake." Jiwoo looked around the penthouse that had been her prison and her palace, her cage, and her sanctuary. 3 weeks ago, she'd been a woman who existed in the margins, who cleaned up other people's messes while remaining utterly forgettable. Now she was someone who could silence a room with a look, who wore her power like expensive jewelry, who had learned that being visible meant being dangerous. 3 weeks ago, the thought of never being safe again would have terrified her. Now, the idea of returning to her small, careful, invisible existence felt like a kind of death. "I have a condition," she said quietly. "Name it. No more lies between us. No more performances or pretending or strategic manipulation. If I stay, if I choose this, then what happens between us has to be real." Something shifted in Daehyun's expression. Surprise, perhaps, or the kind of hope he'd trained himself never to feel. "Even knowing what I am? What I've done?" Especially knowing that? Jiwoo set the biometric key back down on the counter with deliberate precision. "I've seen you kill, lie, manipulate, and threaten. I've also seen you protect what matters to you with everything you have. I'd rather have honesty from a monster than pretty lies from a saint." The kiss that followed was nothing like the gentle brush of lips they had almost shared weeks earlier. This was possession and claiming, hunger and desperation, the kind of kiss that branded souls and rewrote destinies. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Jiwoo understood that she had just crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. "My final command," Daehyun whispered against her lips, his voice rough with something that might have been relief, or triumph, or the kind of love that normal people would never understand. "Yes?" His smile was sharp as broken glass and twice as beautiful. "Love me anyway." Outside, Seoul glittered like a circuit board of dreams and nightmares. A city where invisible women could become queens and monsters could learn to feel something real. Inside the penthouse, 2 damaged people held each other in the darkness and chose danger over safety, visibility over invisibility, love over survival. The cleaner had become the queen, and the monster had finally found something worth keeping forever. In the city of neon and shadows, where power was the only currency that mattered, Kang Daehyun issued his final command to the woman who had seen his worst self and chosen to stay anyway. And Jiwoo Park, who had spent her entire adult life being invisible, finally understood what it felt like to be seen, to be claimed, to be home. The war was over. The real story was just beginning. The war for the Kang Empire is over, but Jiwoo's dangerous new life as the queen of the Underworld has only just begun. Do you want to see what happens when the fake fiancé contract turns into a deadly reality? Hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. It's the only way to ensure you don't miss Chapter 1 of Part 2, The Queen's Gambit. Director Kang is waiting, and he doesn't like to be kept waiting.